Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and respected audience, today we gather to discuss a moment in global politics that left the world both surprised and intrigued. Imagine the most powerful man in the world, former U.S. President Donald Trump, turning towards India seeking support, seeking validation, seeking strength, and yet the silence of Prime Minister Narendra Modi echoed louder than any words. What does it mean when one of the strongest democracies extends a hand and the world's largest democracy chooses silence? Tonight, I will take you through this gripping political moment, what it revealed, what it hid, and why the world is still talking about it. Donald Trump's unexpected plea for India's support was not just a political gesture. It was a moment that revealed vulnerability in the world's most powerful office. Throughout his presidency, Trump was known for his strongman image, projecting himself as decisive, fearless, and often uncompromising. Yet when he reached out to India, it symbolized something more than routine diplomacy. It was a recognition that in an interconnected world, even the mightiest of nations cannot stand entirely on their own. This plea was unexpected because Trump had consistently branded himself as someone who believed in the America First doctrine. His policies often dismissed international cooperation, favoring unilateral action over alliances. However, his call for India's support contradicted this narrative, showing that when pressure mounted, he too looked outward for assistance. India, as the world's largest democracy and a rising global power, holds strategic weight that few nations can ignore. By turning to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Trump acknowledged that India had the potential to influence global balance, whether economically, militarily, or diplomatically. This act demonstrated that Trump recognized India not merely as a regional player, but as an indispensable partner on the international stage. The surprising element was not that Trump sought help, but that he did so publicly, allowing the world to witness his appeal. For a leader who thrived on projecting strength, admitting reliance on another country introduced a sense of desperation, almost as though he was reaching beyond his carefully constructed image to grasp at political survival. This moment also highlighted the shifting nature of global power. Traditionally, the United States was seen as the benefactor, the nation others turned to for aid, direction, or support. Trump's request inverted that dynamic, placing the U.S. in a position of asking rather than offering. It was a symbolic shift, signaling that America's role was changing in the 21st century. Whether it was a matter of trade, security, or political endorsement, Trump's appeal underscored how much weight India now carried on the global chessboard. The request, therefore, became more than a plea. It was recognition of a new balance of power where emerging nations like India could determine outcomes that once only the United States could shape. The world's reaction to this move was telling. Observers were astonished not just at the plea itself, but at the way it exposed cracks in Trump's posture of invincibility. Leaders often rely on quiet behind the scenes diplomacy when making such requests. Yet Trump's approach was more overt, more dramatic, almost as if he wanted the world to see his dependence. Some interpreted it as a strategic move to flatter India into taking a side. Others saw it as a sign of weakness, a rare admission that America could not achieve its goals alone. In either case, the plea represented a departure from Trump's usual bravado, offering a glimpse into the limits of unilateral power. In essence, Trump's unexpected plea was not merely about securing India's cooperation. It was about the vulnerability of leadership, the recognition of shifting global dynamics, and the realization that even the most powerful leaders must sometimes extend their hands outward. It was a moment that surprised the world and set the stage for Modi's silent, yet equally powerful, response. When Donald Trump openly reached out to India, the world waited for Prime Minister Narendra Modi's response. Many expected a strong statement, a diplomatic reassurance, or at least a symbolic gesture of alignment. Yet, what followed was not a declaration to respond. His words might have tied India too closely to the turbulence of American politics. By staying quiet, he kept India above the fray, preserving the nation's image as a neutral yet influential power. In a world where every word from a leader is dissected and debated, saying nothing becomes a statement of independence. Modi's choice suggested that India was not desperate to please, nor eager to be drawn into another country's drama. Instead, he positioned India as a sovereign actor whose decisions would not be dictated by external pressure, even if that pressure came from the most powerful office in the world. Silence also allowed Modi to exercise strategic patience. Global politics often rewards those who wait, who measure their moves carefully rather than reacting impulsively. By not answering Trump's appeal directly, Modi gave himself room to observe the global response, to weigh the consequences, and to act only when the timing favored India. This patience communicated confidence. It signaled that India was not a follower scrambling to align with superpowers, but a nation strong enough to hold its ground and let others make the first move. Furthermore, the silence shifted attention back onto Trump. Instead of creating a partnership moment, it left the U.S. president exposed, his plea hanging unanswered in the air. This imbalance highlighted the vulnerability in Trump's position while simultaneously elevating Modi's stature. The world saw not only a leader who asked for help, but also one who chose not to answer, thereby flipping the power dynamic. In a subtle yet powerful way, Modi reminded everyone that silence can carry authority, and that restraint can project more strength than aggressive words. For the global audience, Modi's silence was both shocking and thought-provoking. It broke the usual script of international relations, where leaders typically respond with diplomatic pleasantries. Instead, the silence forced analysts to read between the lines, to question India's priorities, and to wonder about the larger message being sent. Was it disapproval? Was it neutrality? Or was it simply a demonstration that India now holds the luxury of choice on the global stage? Whatever the interpretation, one truth became clear: silence is never truly empty. Modi's refusal to respond to Trump's plea was itself a carefully constructed response, one that echoed around the world with a resonance more powerful than words. Silence has always carried symbolic power in diplomacy, but Modi's quiet response to Trump's plea made that power visible to the entire world. Unlike ordinary communication, where silence may be mistaken for hesitation or ignorance, in international politics, silence is almost always intentional. It becomes a language of its own, signaling restraint, independence, or disapproval without the burden of explicit words. When Prime Minister Modi chose not to respond directly to Donald Trump's request for India's support, he transformed silence into a diplomatic tool, one that left leaders, analysts, and citizens worldwide searching for meaning. This was not an empty gesture, it was a carefully chosen strategy that demonstrated how silence can shift narratives, control perception, and redefine the balance of power. Diplomatic silence often functions as a shield. By refusing to take a public stance, a leader avoids being trapped in commitments or controversies. If Modi had rushed to endorse Trump, he would have risked alienating other allies or being dragged into America's internal political battles. Conversely, if he had openly rejected the plea, it might have created unnecessary friction in U.S.-India relations. Silence offered the perfect middle ground, a way to engage without entanglement. It shielded India from direct consequences while still keeping everyone's attention fixed on what India might do next. In this way, silence provided flexibility, a freedom to maneuver that words would have immediately restricted. Beyond its protective function, silence also projects strength. In a world accustomed to constant statements, press releases, and speeches, saying nothing becomes an act of defiance. It tells the world that one does not need to explain, justify, or rush. By staying quiet, Modi communicated that India was confident enough to let others speculate, that India's importance was so undeniable it did not require vocal confirmation. The very absence of words became a powerful assertion of sovereignty and control. Trump's plea, therefore, highlighted vulnerability, while Modi's silence underscored composure. The contrast magnified the symbolic weight of silence as a form of leadership. Moreover, silence is an amplifier of meaning. Each day that passed without a response deepened curiosity and intensified interpretation. Analysts debated whether the silence implied strategic neutrality, quiet disapproval, or a desire to extract greater leverage in future negotiations. This ambiguity was not a weakness but an advantage. By refusing to define the silence, Modi allowed it to carry multiple possible meanings, each one useful in different contexts. To some, it showed maturity; to others, it hinted at caution. Either way, it kept India in the spotlight without committing to a fixed narrative. On a broader scale, this moment revealed that diplomacy is not only about what is said, but also about what is withheld. Words can sometimes weaken a position, exposing intentions too clearly. Silence, however, leaves room for interpretation, creating a mystique that often enhances a leader's image. Modi's silence became symbolic of a new India, confident, patient, and unwilling to be pulled into another nation's urgency. It reminded the world that in diplomacy, silence is not emptiness, it is presence. It is a statement that sometimes the loudest message is the one left unspoken. When Donald Trump appealed for India's support and Modi responded with silence, the spotlight naturally shifted onto the broader relationship between the United States and India. The two nations have long shared a complex bond, shaped by history, strategy, and shifting global priorities. Trump's very act of reaching out showed how significant India had become in the eyes of American leadership, while Modi's silence placed the relationship under a microscope. Suddenly, the world was not only asking what Modi would do, but also re-examining the deeper layers of U.S.-India ties. In this way, the moment did not exist in isolation. It was part of a larger narrative that continues to define one of the most important bilateral relationships of the 21st century. The U.S. and India, though both democracies, have historically moved in and out of alignment depending on global circumstances. During the Cold War, India's non-aligned stance often placed it at a distance from Washington, while its ties with the Soviet Union created cautious tension with the United States. Over time, however, this relationship evolved, particularly after the 1990s, as India opened its economy and embraced a greater role in global trade. America began to view India not just as a regional actor, but as a strategic partner capable of balancing powers like China. Against this backdrop, Trump's plea was not simply a personal act. It was a reflection of a long, building recognition that India had become central to America's global strategy. Yet Modi's silence drew attention to the fragility of this partnership. While the U.S. may see India as an indispensable ally, India does not necessarily see itself as bound to American interests. This dynamic revealed the uneven nature of the relationship, one where America's needs may sometimes outweigh India's willingness to commit. Silence highlighted that India values autonomy above alignment, and that even a plea from Washington will not automatically dictate New Delhi's choices. The relationship, therefore, came under scrutiny not for what was said, but for the gap between expectation and response. Global observers took note. Allies of the United States wondered whether America was losing its ability to command support, even from supposed partners. Meanwhile, countries in Asia and beyond saw India's reaction as a signal of its independence, perhaps even a quiet assertion that it would not be swayed by pressure from any single superpower. The U.S.-India relationship, in this sense, became a test case for how power is shared in a multipolar world. The days when the United States could demand and receive unquestioned loyalty were gone. Now, even close partners could choose silence as a way to negotiate their place in global politics. This scrutiny also raised questions about the future trajectory of the partnership. Would Modi's silence strain relations, or would it demonstrate to America that India must be approached as an equal rather than a subordinate? For many, the moment was a turning point, reminding both nations that their bond rests not only on shared democratic values, but also on mutual respect and recognition of sovereignty. The silence, therefore, forced the world to reconsider the balance of power within U.S.-India relations, showing that partnerships in the modern era must be built on choice, not coercion. When Trump openly turned to India for help and Modi answered with silence, the world did not only analyze the politics of the moment, it began questioning the nature of leadership itself. The contrast between Trump's plea and Modi's restraint created a fascinating study of how leaders are perceived internationally. Leadership is not only about the policies one enacts or the words one speaks, it is also about how those actions are interpreted by the global community. In this instance, Trump's decision to ask for support appeared to many as a sign of vulnerability, while Modi's silence was perceived as a display of composure and strength. Together, these two responses reshaped international perceptions of both men, casting light on how fragile and powerful leadership images can be. Trump had built his brand as a strong, decisive leader who prided himself on making bold moves and putting America first. His appeal to India, however, revealed a different side. To some, it looked like humility, an acknowledgement that the United States could not always act alone. To others, it seemed like desperation, as if the most powerful leader in the world was suddenly dependent on outside validation. This moment shook the carefully constructed image Trump had cultivated. Leaders are often judged not by what they admit, but by what they avoid admitting, and Trump's willingness to openly plead shifted international opinion about his reliability as a global figure. In stark contrast, Modi's silence projected steadiness. By choosing not to respond, he avoided entanglement while simultaneously amplifying his authority. Around the world, this restraint was seen as maturity, a willingness to resist provocation, and a clear message that India would not be pressured into immediate action. In the arena of international politics, where words can trigger consequences, silence can suggest mastery over both emotion and circumstance. As a result, Modi's reputation on the world stage grew not because of what he said, but because of what he refused to say. His silence was interpreted as an act of control, reinforcing the perception of India as a rising power guided by strategic patience. The global audience read this moment as a lesson in the diversity of leadership styles. Trump represented a vocal, performative style, loud, dramatic, and attention-grabbing. Modi embodied a quiet, strategic style, measured, ambiguous, and deliberate. Neither approach is inherently right or wrong, but their collision in this moment allowed the world to reflect on what kind of leadership it values. For some nations, Trump's directness seemed refreshing. For others, Modi's silence appeared wiser, signaling a new standard for leadership in the modern age, one defined less by rhetoric and more by resilience. Ultimately, the incident revealed that international perceptions of leadership are shaped not by raw power alone, but by how leaders navigate delicate situations. Trump's plea and Modi's silence became a symbolic exchange, one that exposed the vulnerability of even the strongest figures while highlighting the potency of restraint. It showed the world that leadership is not measured only in speeches or actions, but in the ability to command attention, even in silence. Strength is often imagined as loud, forceful, and visible, armies marching, leaders making bold declarations, or nations asserting dominance. Yet history and diplomacy repeatedly teach us that true strength can also lie in restraint. In the context of Trump's plea and Modi's silence, this truth became undeniable. Trump's openness showed the vulnerability of even the most powerful office, while Modi's quiet refusal to respond demonstrated how restraint itself can be a form of authority. This incident served as a reminder that leadership is not always about doing more, but sometimes about doing less, and doing it deliberately. Restraint in leadership does not mean weakness, it means control. It signals the ability to act, but choosing not to act because patience serves a greater purpose. Modi's silence was not born out of fear or indecision. It was a calculated decision that allowed him to maintain India's independence, avoid unnecessary commitments, and preserve flexibility for the future. In a world where every word is dissected, choosing not to speak can be more powerful than rushing into statements that later limit one's options. Restraint, therefore, becomes a strategy, a way to maintain leverage by not revealing one's hand too quickly. This concept also highlights the difference between reaction and response. Trump's plea demanded attention, but Modi resisted the pressure to react impulsively. By withholding comment, he responded in a way that elevated his position. Restraint allowed him to observe how the world interpreted the situation, to let others reveal their cards first, and to ensure that India would not be dragged into a narrative it did not control. It showed that strength is not about meeting pressure with equal force, but about shaping the terms of engagement to one's own advantage. On the global stage, restraint also earns respect. Nations understand that silence, when intentional, reflects discipline. A leader who can resist the temptation to speak immediately or act hastily demonstrates a rare kind of power, the power of patience. This is the kind of strength that endures longer than noise. While loud declarations may capture headlines, restraint creates lasting influence because it invites the world to keep watching, waiting, and wondering. Modi's silence became a talking point precisely because it left room for interpretation, giving it more longevity than any short-lived statement could have achieved. The lesson, therefore, is clear. Restraint is not absence but presence. It is the art of knowing when to hold back so that when action finally comes, it carries greater impact. Leaders who understand this are not controlled by the moment, they control the moment. Trump's plea and Modi's silence illustrated this perfectly. One leader's openness exposed need, while the other's restraint revealed strength. The world was reminded that sometimes the loudest message is the quietest one, and that in leadership, as in life, strength is often measured not by how much you say or do, but by how wisely you choose to wait.